My neighbor looked me dead in the eye and said she wouldn't let her perfect children play with my son because we didn't come from a stable home. 3 weeks later, at the school open house, my 8-year-old boy stood up in front of everyone and delivered a response that left her speechless. Let me tell you how we got there. Because this story isn't just about judgment or redemption. It's about discovering that sometimes the very things people shame you for are actually your greatest strengths. My name is Maya Chen, and 6 months ago, I made what felt like the biggest gamble of my life. I packed up everything my son Ethan and I owned, left the cramped but love-filled apartment we shared with my mother Elena, and moved us to Maplewood Heights. You know the type of neighborhood I'm talking about. Pristine lawns, luxury SUVs in every driveway, and houses that cost more than I'd make in 10 years. Why would a single mother working 2 jobs move to a place like that? Simple. The schools. Ethan is 8 years old, brilliant beyond his years, and has this way of asking questions that make you stop in your tracks. Questions like, "Mom, why do some people have more chances than others?" Or, "Do you think being different makes you stronger or just lonelier?" This kid deserved every opportunity I could possibly give him, even if it meant I'd be cleaning office buildings until midnight to afford the rent on our tiny 2-bedroom apartment. But here's what I didn't expect when we moved to Maplewood Heights. I thought fitting in would be about having the right clothes or the right car. I never imagined it would be about justifying our right to exist in the same space as everyone else. Ethan is the kind of kid who approaches life with open arms. Within our first week, he was trying to make friends at the neighborhood playground, asking other kids about their favorite books, sharing his snacks, completely unaware that some parents were already watching us with suspicious eyes. While other moms chatted easily about tennis lessons and vacation homes, I stood there in my scrubs from my day job at the medical clinic, trying to figure out how to join conversations that seemed to happen in a completely different language. That's when I met Rebecca Sterling. 42 years old, perfectly highlighted blonde hair, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about whether your card will decline at the grocery store. Rebecca had twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, who were in Ethan's grade. Beautiful, well-behaved girls who wore matching outfits and spoke in the polite, measured way that comes from years of etiquette classes. Rebecca's husband, David, was equally polished, a successful attorney who drove a Tesla and wore watches that probably cost more than my monthly salary. The kind of man who shook hands firmly and asked about your profession within the first 5 minutes of meeting you, already calculating your social value before you finished answering. In those first few weeks, I watched other families effortlessly arrange playdates, birthday party invitations, and weekend get-togethers. I told myself we just needed time. Ethan would make friends, I'd find my place among the other parents, and eventually, we'd belong. But belonging, I was about to learn, isn't just about showing up. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, there are people who look at your life and decide you don't meet their standards before they even know your story. The confrontation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday evening at Sunset Park, the neighborhood's crown jewel with its designer playground equipment and perfectly manicured gardens. I was pushing Ethan on the swings after my shift at the clinic, still wearing my medical scrubs because I had exactly 30 minutes before I needed to leave for my night job cleaning offices downtown. That's when Rebecca approached me with that look. You know the one. The look that says she's about to deliver news that she thinks is for my own good, but will actually shatter something inside you that you didn't even know was fragile. What she said next didn't just hurt. It ignited something in me that I didn't know existed. And 3 weeks later, my 8-year-old son would stand in front of a room full of parents and teachers and show them what real strength looks like. Let me paint you a picture of who we were before everything changed, because understanding where we came from makes what happened next so much more powerful. I'm a medical assistant at Riverside Family Clinic, which means I spend my days taking vitals, updating patient charts, and trying to make scared kids laugh before their shots. It's honest work that I love, but it doesn't exactly pay Maplewood Heights rent. That's why every night at 11, I drive across town to clean office buildings until 4 in the morning. I sleep when Ethan's at school, and somehow we make it work. People always ask me, "Maya, isn't that exhausting?" And yes, it is. But you know what's more exhausting? Watching your brilliant kid's potential get limited by zip codes and circumstances he didn't choose. Ethan reads at a fifth grade level, builds elaborate Lego cities with working traffic systems, and has this uncanny ability to remember every single detail about space exploration. This kid deserves teachers who recognize his gifts, not just manage his energy. Before we moved to Maplewood Heights, we lived with my mother, Elena, in her one-bedroom apartment in Riverside. 3 generations crammed into 600 square feet, but filled with more love and laughter than some mansions ever see. Elena would cook huge pots of rice and beans that stretched for days, and Ethan would fall asleep to the sound of her telenovelas playing softly in the living room, where I slept on the pull-out couch. Elena raised me alone after my father decided fatherhood was too complicated when I was 12. She worked double shifts at a textile factory, came home exhausted, but still helped me with homework at the kitchen table. When I got pregnant with Ethan at 25 and his father disappeared the moment he heard the news, Elena just made room. No judgment, no lectures, just, "We'll figure it out, mije. We always do." That apartment was cramped, sure, but it was also our sanctuary. Ethan learned to speak Spanish from his grandmother, to cook from watching Elena's careful hands, and to understand that family isn't about perfection. It's about showing up for each other, especially when things get hard. But I wanted more for him. I wanted him in schools where teachers had time to nurture curiosity instead of just maintaining order. I wanted him to see that dreaming big was possible, that hard work could take you places. So when I saved enough for a security deposit, I found the cheapest apartment I could in the best school district I could afford. The move was harder than I expected, not just financially, though eating ramen for dinner so Ethan could have fresh fruit for lunch was definitely an adjustment. The hardest part was feeling like we were constantly being measured against standards we didn't even know existed. In Riverside, I was Maya, Elena's daughter, the one working so hard to make something of herself. Here, I was the single mom who works 2 jobs. And somehow that felt like a judgment rather than a compliment. Other parents talked about their kids' violin lessons and soccer camps while I was calculating whether I could afford to sign Ethan up for the school's aftercare program. Ethan felt it too, though he never complained. He'd come home from school and tell me about his day with this careful tone, like he was editing out the parts that might worry me. "Mom, I sat with Jackson at lunch today. He's really nice. His family is going to Disney World next month." No mention of not being invited to birthday parties or standing alone during recess while other kids planned weekend adventures. But here's the thing about my son. He inherited something from all those generations of women who refused to give up. He inherited Elena's quiet strength, my stubborn determination, and something uniquely his own, this ability to find meaning in everything, even rejection. One evening, about a month after we moved, I found him in his room drawing what looked like a tree. Not just any tree, but one with deep, sprawling roots that seemed to take up more space than the branches above ground. "What are you working on, baby?" I asked. He looked up with those serious dark eyes and said, "Mrs. Rodriguez says we're going to study family trees at school. I'm practicing." He pointed to the roots. "These are the most important part, right, Mom? You can't see them, but they're what keeps everything strong." I had no idea that drawing would change everything. The moment that shattered my faith in fresh starts happened on a Thursday afternoon at Sunset Park. I had just finished my shift at the clinic and picked up Ethan from school. He was excited because his teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had praised his science project on planetary rotation, and he wanted to celebrate by going to the good playground, the one with the rocket ship climbing structure. Ethan ran straight to where Rebecca's twins, Emma and Sophie, were playing with 3 other kids from their class. I watched him approach with that hopeful energy that 8-year-olds have, completely unaware that some doors are closed before you even knock. "Hi, Emma." "Hi, Sophie," Ethan called out, jogging over with his backpack still bouncing on his shoulders. "Want to play Space Explorers? I just learned that Jupiter has 79 moons." The kids looked interested, but then I saw Rebecca's head snap up from her phone. She was sitting on a bench about 20 feet away, designer sunglasses perched perfectly, matching her daughter's color-coordinated outfits. She watched Ethan for exactly 3 seconds before standing up and walking briskly toward the group. "Girls," Rebecca called out in that sweet but firm voice that mothers use when they want to sound loving but mean business. "Emma, Sophie, we need to head home now. Daddy's expecting us for dinner." But Mom, we just started playing, Sophie protested. Ethan was going to show us how to play astronauts. Now, girls. Rebecca's tone left no room for negotiation. She gathered their matching pink backpacks and ushered them toward the parking lot, but not before shooting me a look that made my stomach twist. It wasn't quite rude enough to call her out on, but it was clear enough to make me understand. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe they really did have dinner plans. Maybe Rebecca was just protective of her schedule. I tried to ignore the way Ethan's shoulders slumped as he watched them leave, or how he pretended to be fascinated by the mulch under the swings for the next 10 minutes. But 3 days later, any doubt I had evaporated. I was at Whole Foods after my evening shift, grabbing milk and the generic cereal Ethan actually preferred over the name brands. I was exhausted, still wearing my scrubs, my hair falling out of its ponytail, when I literally bumped into Rebecca in the produce section. "Oh, Maya, hi," she said, her voice carrying that forced brightness people use when they're about to say something uncomfortable. "Hi, Rebecca. How are Emma and Sophie?" "They're wonderful, thank you." She paused, glancing around like she was checking to see who might overhear. "Actually, I'm glad I ran into you. There's something I should probably address." My heart started racing, but I kept my voice steady. "Oh?" Rebecca adjusted her designer purse strap and took a breath. "I hope you understand, but I wouldn't feel comfortable letting my girls play with your son. Children from unstable homes sometimes bring complicated behaviors, and David and I have worked really hard to create a secure environment for our daughters." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Unstable homes? It's nothing personal against Ethan," she continued, her voice getting faster like she wanted to get this over with. "I'm sure he's a lovely boy. But single mothers, working multiple jobs, moving around a lot, it creates stress for children, and that stress can manifest in ways that affect other kids." That's when David appeared, pushing a cart loaded with organic everything and wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "Everything okay here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew what conversation he'd walked into. Rebecca looked relieved to have backup. "I was just explaining to Maya about the playdate situation." David nodded seriously, like they'd rehearsed this. "Kids pick up habits from their environment. It's nothing personal, just protective parenting. I'm sure you understand." I stood there, frozen, holding my generic cereal and wondering how exactly I was supposed to respond to being told my child was essentially contaminated by our circumstances. "I see," I managed to say, though my voice sounded strange and distant even to me. "I knew you'd understand," Rebecca said, already backing away. "You seem like a very reasonable person." They walked away, leaving me standing in the organic produce section, shaking with a mixture of humiliation and rage I'd never experienced before. That night, I lay awake wondering if moving to Maplewood Heights had been the biggest mistake of my life. That night, I did something I hadn't done since moving to Maplewood Heights. I cried, not the quiet, careful tears I'd learned to hide from Ethan, but the deep, body-shaking sobs that come when you realize you've been fighting a battle you didn't even know you were in. I sat on my bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, questioning everything. Should we move back to Elena's apartment? Was I being selfish, forcing Ethan to navigate a world that clearly didn't want us? Maybe Rebecca was right. Maybe I was too stressed, too unstable, too much of a risk for their perfect children. But then I heard something that changed everything. Ethan was supposed to be asleep, but I could hear his small voice coming from his bedroom. He was on the phone with Elena, and I found myself standing in the hallway, listening to my 8-year-old son process what he was too young to have to understand. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" His voice was small but thoughtful. "Mama moved us here so I could have better opportunities, but I think the kids here already have too many opportunities to learn they're better than other people." I pressed my hand against the wall, my heart breaking and swelling at the same time. Elena's voice came through the phone, warm and strong, even through the speaker. "Mijo, tell me what happened." Some parents don't want their kids to play with me because we're different. Not different like we speak Spanish or have brown hair, but different like we don't have enough money or the right kind of family. "And how does that make you feel, baby?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Sad for them, mostly. They don't know what they're missing. Like when you make your arroz con pollo and people think it's weird because it's not hamburgers, but they don't know it tastes like home and love and Sunday afternoons. That's when I knew. My son didn't need me to shield him from judgment. He needed me to teach him how to stand tall despite it. The next morning, Ethan came to breakfast with that family tree drawing again, but this time he'd added more details. Some branches were colored in dark crayon. Others had what looked like Band-Aids drawn on them. Mrs. Rodriguez announced our family heritage project yesterday, he said, carefully adding another root to his drawing. We have to present to all the parents at the open house next month. I sat down beside him, studying his artwork. Tell me about these roots, baby. Well, this one is Great-Grandma Carmen, who came here when she was young and scared but brave. This one is Great-Grandpa Miguel, who died when Grandpa was little but still taught him to work hard. And this one is Grandma Elena, who raised you all by herself and made you strong enough to raise me. He pointed to a section where the trunk looked like it had been broken and regrown. This is where Daddy left, but see how the tree kept growing? Mrs. Rodriguez says trees that survive storms have the strongest roots. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to confront Rebecca or complain to other parents or try to force our way into their circles. I was going to let Ethan's character speak for itself. Over the next 3 weeks, we worked on that project every evening after my day job and before my night shift. I told him stories I'd never shared before, about Carmen arriving at Ellis Island with nothing but hope, about Miguel working 3 jobs to support his family, about Elena raising me with a strength that came from surviving loss. But I also told him about the beautiful parts, how Carmen's tiny apartment always smelled like fresh bread, and how neighbors from 5 different countries would gather for dinner. How Miguel taught Elena to find joy in simple things, a good song on the radio, a successful recipe, the sound of children laughing. Our family tree doesn't look like everyone else's, I told Ethan one evening as we worked together at our small kitchen table. It has broken branches and missing pieces, but baby, those breaks are where the light gets in. That's where we learn to grow stronger. Elena came to visit the weekend before the open house. She looked at Ethan's completed project, now a beautiful, complex tree with roots that seemed to spread beyond the paper, and smiled. "Mijo," she said, "this tree is perfect. It tells the truth about who we are." I had no idea how prophetic those words would be. The night before the open house, I barely slept. I kept thinking about all the polished presentations we'd be competing against, all the perfect family trees with their neat branches and successful ancestors. At 3 a.m., I almost called Mrs. Rodriguez to tell her Ethan was sick and couldn't present. But then I remembered what Elena had said. You can't protect him from every judgment, but you can teach him to stand tall despite them. The Jefferson Elementary multi-purpose room was packed that Thursday evening. Parents filled every folding chair, most of them dressed like they were attending a corporate board meeting rather than a third-grade presentation. I spotted Rebecca immediately. She was sitting in the front row wearing a cream-colored blazer, David beside her scrolling through his phone. The presentations began alphabetically, which meant we'd be somewhere in the middle. Emma Sterling went third, standing confidently beside a poster board that looked professionally made. Her family tree was perfect, color-coded branches stretching back to the 1800s, filled with doctors, lawyers, and business owners. My great-great-grandfather founded Sterling and Associates law firm, Emma announced proudly. My great-grandmother was the first woman president of the Maplewood Country Club. My family has been successful for over 100 years. Rebecca beamed from the front row, and I watched other parents nod approvingly. Each presentation that followed was similar, polished, proud, and perfect. Kids talked about family vacation homes, Ivy League educations, and legacy admissions to prestigious universities. By the time Mrs. Rodriguez called Ethan Chen, my hands were shaking. My son walked to the front of the room carrying his hand-drawn poster, so different from the others with their computer graphics and laminated edges. His family tree was drawn in colored pencils, with some branches deliberately darker than others, some sections that looked like they'd been erased and redrawn. The room fell quiet in that way that happens when people aren't sure what they're about to witness. Ethan cleared his throat and looked directly at the audience. "This is my family tree," he began, his voice steady despite being 8 years old. "It doesn't look like the others you've seen tonight, and that's okay." He pointed to the deepest roots on his poster. "My great-grandmother Carmen came to America with just a suitcase and a dream. She didn't speak English, but she learned by watching soap operas and helping her neighbors. She cleaned houses and saved every penny so her children could go to school." Some parents shifted in their seats. This wasn't the usual success story. My great-grandfather Miguel worked 3 jobs, in a factory, at a grocery store, and cleaning offices at night, so his family could have a better life. He died young because he worked so hard, but he taught my grandpa that no work is too small, if it's done with love. Ethan's voice grew stronger. "My grandmother, Elena, raised my mom all by herself when my grandfather left. She worked double shifts at a textile factory and still helped my mom with homework every night at their tiny kitchen table. When I was born and my dad left too, Grandma Elena just said, 'We'll make room. We always do.'" I saw Rebecca's face changing, the smug confidence melting into something that looked like discomfort. "My mom works 2 jobs so I can go to this school," Ethan continued. "She's a medical assistant during the day, helping sick people feel better. At night, she cleans offices so we can afford to live here. She sleeps 4 hours a night and never complains." The room was completely silent now. Even David had stopped looking at his phone. Then Ethan said the words that changed everything. "My teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, told us that trees grow strongest in storms. She said the roots have to dig deeper when the wind blows hard." He paused, looking directly at Rebecca and David. "These roots? They grew strong in storms, and now they're helping me grow strong too." The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then from the back of the room, someone started clapping slowly. I turned to see Mr. Peterson, the school principal, standing up. Mrs. Rodriguez was wiping tears from her eyes. David Sterling started clapping too, and then he stood up. Other parents followed, and soon the entire room was on their feet, applauding my son's courage. But Rebecca sat frozen, her face flushed red, staring at Ethan like she was seeing him for the first time. The applause felt like it lasted forever, but eventually the room settled and other presentations continued. I couldn't focus on anything else, though. I kept watching Rebecca, who hadn't clapped, hadn't stood, and now sat staring at her hands like she was trying to disappear into her designer blazer. After the last presentation, parents mingled over coffee and cookies while kids ran around showing off their projects. I was helping Ethan pack up his poster when David Sterling approached us, without Rebecca. "Ethan," he said, crouching down to my son's eye level, "that was the most honest presentation I've ever heard. You should be very proud." Then he looked at me, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't expected. Shame. "Maya, I owe you and your son an apology. Big one. What I said at the grocery store was wrong, and there's no excuse for it." Before I could respond, he continued, "I've been thinking about my own family tree lately. My great-grandfather made his fortune selling watered-down medicine to desperate people during the Depression. My grandfather inherited money he didn't earn and used it to exclude people who didn't look like him from his businesses. Sometimes the roots we're proud of grew in pretty ugly soil." Ethan, with that startling wisdom of his, looked up at David and said, "But you can plant new seeds, right? My mom says every generation gets to choose what kind of tree they want to grow." David smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time since I'd known him. "You're absolutely right, Ethan. Thank you for reminding me of that." 20 minutes later, as the crowd was thinning, Rebecca finally approached us. Her perfect composure was gone, replaced by something raw and vulnerable I'd never seen before. "Maya," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't even know how to begin apologizing for what I said, what I did." I waited, not making it easy for her, but not walking away either. "When Ethan was talking about your family, about the sacrifices, about working 2 jobs," she paused, struggling with words. "My girls have never seen me work a day in their lives. They think money just appears, that opportunities are given, not earned. They have no idea what real strength looks like." Rebecca looked at Ethan, who was carefully rolling up his family tree poster. "Would it be possible? I know I have no right to ask this, but would Emma and Sophie be able to have a play date with Ethan? Not because I feel sorry for him, but because I think my daughters need to learn what it means to be resilient, what it means to have character. 3 months later, as I'm recording this story, I can tell you that evening changed everything, but not in the way you might expect. Ethan and the Sterling twins became genuine friends, not because Rebecca felt guilty, but because the girls were genuinely curious about Ethan's stories, his grandmother's cooking, and his completely different perspective on what makes life meaningful. Emma told me last week that Ethan taught her that having less stuff doesn't mean having less fun. Rebecca surprised me most of all. She started a support group for working parents in the district, helping them navigate the unspoken social rules of Maplewood Heights. She even babysits Ethan sometimes when I'm working late, and he's teaching her basic Spanish phrases that make Elena laugh until she cries. But the biggest change happened in me. I realized I had been so worried about Ethan being accepted that I'd almost forgotten to teach him the most important lesson of all. Our worth isn't determined by other people's approval. That night, driving home from the open house, Ethan said something that I'll never forget. "Mom, I'm glad our family tree is different. The other kids talked about what their ancestors did for them, but I got to talk about what our ancestors did for everyone who came after them. That feels bigger somehow." Now, when people ask about our family tree, Ethan says we're the kind that grows stronger after every storm, and we're still growing. We're still sending down deeper roots in Maplewood Heights, not because we've been accepted, but because we've finally accepted ourselves. Sometimes the very things people judge you for are actually your greatest strengths. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to tell your truth, you discover that the people who matter most are the ones who've been waiting to hear it. Telling this story reminded me why I started sharing these experiences in the first place. We all have moments when we feel judged, excluded, or like we don't quite fit in. But maybe that's exactly when we need to remember that our differences aren't flaws to hide, they're strengths to celebrate. Elena always tells me, "Mija, the people who are meant to be in your life will love you for exactly who you are, not who you pretend to be." Ethan proved that at 8 years old, and I'm still learning it at 34. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Have you ever had a moment when someone underestimated you or your family? How did you handle it? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps other people find these stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about finding strength in unexpected places, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Remember, your roots make you who you are, and sometimes the storms that try to break you are actually making you stronger than you ever imagined possible. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.